going to get started. All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's panel presentation titled After Summit, How Do We Get to Carbon Neutrality by 2045? I'm Brenda Harrington, the program librarian at the Belfast Free Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us. The library is co-sponsoring this program with the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee. We ask that you please keep your mics muted and that you type any questions into the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. I will now turn the mic over to Jon Beal, Chair of the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee. Take it away, Jon.
Thank you, Brenda, and good evening to you all. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists, all of whom have expertise in the areas that we're trying to talk about tonight. First, Matt Marks has been Executive Director of the Associated General Contractors of Maine since 2012. The Associated General Contractors is the state's largest construction industry trade association. Matt serves as the representative for the building and construction trades on the Maine Climate Council and is also a member of the council's subcommittee on transportation. He is also a member of the Equity Subcommittee of the Maine Climate Council, which supports planning and implementation of the state's climate strategies. Matt is a native of South Portland, and prior to joining the AGC in 2008, he was employed by a diversified family business that included construction, fuel, transportation, and property development. Dan Sosland is president and founder of the Acadia Center and a resident of Rockport. The Acadia Center is a regional nonprofit research and policy advocacy organization with offices in Maine and the Northeast, advancing the clean energy future of the state and regional levels. Dan's efforts focus on developing and implementing comprehensive and sustained energy and climate policy. He holds a law degree from Cornell and an AB from Brown. Andy Meyer is Senior Program Manager with expertise in heat pumps with Efficiency Maine. Efficiency Maine Trust is the independent administrator for programs to improve the efficiency of energy use and reduce greenhouse gases in Maine. The trust does this primarily by delivering financial incentives on the purchase of high efficiency equipment or changes to operations that help customers save electricity, natural gas, and other fuels throughout the Maine economy. The trust is a quasi-state agency governed by a board of trustees with oversight from the Maine Public Utilities Commission. Please note, Efficiency Maine has agreed to participate tonight solely to contribute facts on heat pump efficiency and availability. They take no position on the desirability of a gas pipeline in the Mid-Coast and do not express any opinion on which energy sources may be best to pursue or install. And our 4th panelist is Jonathan Fulford, a resident of Belfast and a member of the executive committee of the Maine chapter of the Sierra Club. Jonathan is involved in several initiatives in relating to the reforming of Maine's power generation and distribution systems, including Our Power, a non advocating for development of consumer-owned utilities. Reflective of his interest in wind power, Jonathan loves to sail. So that is our panel. Summit Gas was invited to participate tonight, but we were unable to agree on a format. So next, before we begin talking to our panelists, I want to give some background on why we're here. The Maine Climate Plan was issued in December of 2020. The plan recognized the scientific consensus that global greenhouse gas accumulation, including emissions from burning of fossil fuels, is resulting in a rapid and potentially catastrophic global warming. Like every plan throughout the world, the Maine plan has ambitious but necessary provisions to stop and reverse global warming by both eliminating most greenhouse gas emissions and by converting our heating, transportation, industrial, and other activities to non-greenhouse gas emitting energy sources like solar and wind power. Maine's greenhouse gas reduction goals are to reduce greenhouse 45% below the 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below those levels by 2050. Also, our goal is to achieve carbon neutrality no later than 2045. The entire world needs to pursue greenhouse gas reduction plans in order to prevent further serious disruption in our planet's climate and ecological systems. The Maine plan appears to include some use of natural gas and renewable natural gas for some period, but it's unclear when and how or whether it will be phased out. Fossil fuels like oil and gas emit carbon dioxide when burned, and carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas contributing to global warming. A large proportion of Maine homes and businesses use oil for space heating, and this is a major contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. Natural gas, like oil, is a fossil fuel, but emits fewer greenhouse gases upon combustion. At the beginning of February 2021, Summit Natural Gas announced its intention to build a natural gas pipeline from Belfast down Route 1 to Rockland and Thomaston, investing $90 million in the project. According to Summit, its proposed expansion would create more than 100 jobs, putting local people to work, reduce energy costs for homes, businesses, and industry, reduce emissions by an estimated 263,000 metric tons of CO2 in the first 5 years of the project, transition industry and homes from oil and dirtier fuel sources to a cleaner burning fuel consistent with the Maine climate plan, and increase energy access and options. Summit argued that converting a home from an old, inefficient heating system to a highly efficient natural gas system could reduce emissions by an estimated 38%. The company made contact with town managers and was soliciting commercial and residential customers to sign up for its pipeline. According to an article in the Penn Bay Pilot, there was hesitancy on the part of some officials in several towns, but Summit's press release included 2 endorsements from Midcoast municipal officers in Rockport and Belfast. On February 23rd, the Rockland City Council held a meeting on the Summit proposal. During that meeting, Summit spoke of the benefits of RNG, renewable natural gas, and of green hydrogen. Some people spoke in favor of the project, many spoke against it. On March 2nd, Summit withdrew due to local opposition. The Summit proposal and its sudden withdrawal and the substantial opposition voiced in Rockland by Rockland residents and others, by legislators and local officials, made it clear to us that the possibility of a gas pipeline coming into the Mid-Coast area is not dead, that the issue it raised are live and need addressing, and that those issues are intimately connected to how and whether Maine will be able to meet its goal of carbon neutrality by 2045 and the other goals set out in the climate plan. Those are the reasons we're presenting this discussion. Next, I will open the discussion by asking questions for the panelists to respond to. We're going to have the panelists respond to those questions they wish, and then other panelists can respond. This will be hopefully be a free-flowing conversation. After the panelists answer questions, we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. Let me share my screen. We encourage the audience members to focus on questions for the panelists by using our chat box and to save their comments and opinions for submission by email. We'll be drafting a report on this forum, and people's comments and opinions are best collected by email. So with that, excuse me, let me start with a basic question. Maine's greenhouse reduction goals, 45% below 1990 by 2030, 80% by 2050, carbon neutrality no later than 2045. We are taking as given for this discussion that these are our mutually agreed upon goals. Does any panelist disagree with those goals or feel that they're impossible to reach? Hearing none, I'm assuming everyone thinks that we can do it if we, yes, Jonathan. You're muted, Jonathan.
I think it's a minimum. Yeah, I know it'll be a hard lift, but it's a minimum, and bolder goals, though even harder to achieve, might make us have better outcomes. So.
if I could just note, John, and add on to that, they're good goals, and they're becoming pretty consistent goals, as probably most people know. But like Massachusetts just adopted 50% by 2030. They had a bit of a tussle between the legislative bill and the governor there. So I mean, we're talking in the right range, but I agree they need to be ambitious and they're doable. And but it's nice to see the states and the region, because we're all connected in some ways, Maine with the grid, you know, heading towards common goals for 2030 and 2050.
Yeah, I would add to that,
Um,
John. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but you know, I would say is from the council perspective, you know, I think what
You're breaking.
what's that?
Try again, Matt.
Okay, from a council perspective, I think as the Climate Council put this together, they knew they had to be aggressive, and you know, they really looked at if you read the report and you looked at the major areas, you know, obviously transportation, and then you know, in our buildings and homes and commercial buildings. I mean, there are some really concrete things that came out of it, and I think, you know, you had to set the goals to be aggressive, because there's a lot of moving parts, and so it constantly moves that ship in the right direction. And I think that's what was important about having, you know, a goal that I believe can be done, but it's going to require a constant reminder that we have a lot of action items to do. And I think that's what this report did. It set the tone or the stage for that.
My reading of the climate goal indicates that the goal of the main plan is to convert to all electric home heating and hot water, and to abandon all fossil fuel use for those purposes by 2050. Is everyone on the panel agree that that is in fact the goal? Hearing no disagreement. I also read that they want, the plan envisions the same for commercial and industrial, that in fact, virtually all process heating in industrial work can be replaced by electrical, and should be. Am I correct there?
Yeah, I think there'll be different ways to get there, though. I mean, that's it's sort of a very broad topic, you know, to say that's how that's going to work. We know that's going to be more complicated than that, no question. But there will be different pathways for a person to get there and meet those goals. And I think that's, you know, as an industrial working group focusing on that. But we're trying to take the big blocks first. I think that's the most important. And you know, the role Efficiency Maine has right out of the gate, and he's got a long to-do list, I think, already.
Yeah. My understanding is that the primary goal, the primary tool to try and get residences to move away from fossil fuels is the use of heat pumps. Andy, can you tell us whether or not heat pumps and related electrical equipment can in fact meet the space and water heating requirements of Mainers?
Yes, I'll talk all night if you let me. Yes, the heat pumps in Maine
I think
now.
you're frozen, Andy.
Oh, am I frozen? Can others hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I can
You're
hear
back
you.
now.
Yeah.
John, I think you might have an intermittent connection. So I'll say it again. Heat pumps do work in Maine. They work in the coldest of temperatures. They work all winter long, and they do not need backup anymore. They used to, but they don't now. And we're rebating, this year we will rebate 20,000 heat pumps in residential in Maine. And we're seeing more and more homes, including mine, that it's the only heating system people use. So yes, the technology is there and the price is there. And we have about 500 companies across the state that install them. So we have the installation capacity. So yeah, the technology is ready for Maine.
I was impressed when I spoke to you last week. I did not realize how low temperatures could be handled by the current heat pumps. Can you talk about how cold it can get and those things will still do their job?
Yeah, again, they've changed. So 10, 12 years ago when we started this program, there were two types of people in Maine. Those who didn't know what a heat pump was, and those that knew in the cold. And that actually was based on truth, because 20 years ago that was true. But about a dozen years ago, we came out with a new technology, ductless mini split heat pumps. So on the past, heat pumps in Maine meant geothermal. You had to get the heat from the ground, which is typically 50 degrees. You couldn't run a heat pump below, you couldn't get heat out of air that was colder than roughly 30 degrees. So that doesn't work at all in Maine. They came out with new technology, ductless mini split heat pumps. And that's what we're talking about now when we talk about heat pumps. And they work just fine. The one in the room where I am right now it's a regular one, not an unusual one, is rated at 6,000 BTUs per hour. Not an important number, but just remember 6,000. And at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, its ability to produce heat goes down and down and down. And at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, it produces more than 6,000 BTUs per hour. So even at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, it's producing, I think it was 104% of capacity. And I think we all know that there's no combustion system that at any temperature ever produces more than 100% capacity. So at its worst, at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, a heat pump, others work at negative 15, negative 20. But even at their very, very worst, they can produce plenty of heat. It's just a matter of putting the right sized unit in a house. So that's a myth that has a basis in fact, that heat pumps did not used to work in the extreme cold. And now they do, which is why I can say confidently, if people want to switch their house over to 100% electric heat, they can do it right now. And it costs about the same as natural gas to run. So it's far cheaper than oil, maybe half the price of oil, and roughly 1/3 the price of propane. So we've got a good tech story and a financial story right now. If you want to be more comfortable and reduce your carbon footprint, there's never been a better time.
So before we go back to the gas issues, Andy, can you give our listeners an idea of what kind of investment is required to get heat pumps into a house?
Yes, would you repeat the question, John? What kind
Sure.
of?
How much does it cost?
Oh, the
to get
cost of a
house
heat
on
pump? Yeah, sure. That's a great question. People need to know that. It's always going to vary. It's not just a heat pump, it's installation, and the installation can be half, could actually be more than half of the cost. So it's going to depend on how complex it is. But if you're just trying to get a rough number estimate as to what would it take to convert your house, for each indoor unit costs roughly $3,500. If you were to put in 3, for example, and get a rebate, we have rebates up to $2,500. It might cost you about $30 a month to convert your house to heat pumps with 3 indoor units. If you have a bigger house, you want one in every room, it could be, 6 units would be $60 a month. But that's roughly what it would cost. You think $3,500 for each indoor unit, and every $10,000 that you finance is $106 a month. Those are a few numbers to keep in mind. So what a lot of people are doing is leaving their fossil fuel heating system and putting just one indoor unit in their house. They put it in the room that they use most often, and that room will be perfectly comfortable all year long. All winter, you'll be warm, and all summer, if you want to use the AC function that they all include, you'll be comfortable all year long. The room next door, I don't know. That's probably not going to be as warm. And the room on the far end of the house on the next floor up behind the closed door, that room's probably going to be pretty cold. It doesn't matter how much heat the heat pump puts out. It's just a matter of, it's hard to blow it down a hallway through a closed door. So a lot of people start with one heat pump. That's the $3,500. And they use it kind of like a wood stove. It's very much like a wood stove. It keeps the room it's in perfectly comfortable. And then I warn people they're a bit addictive. So it's very common for people to put in a second one at some point, and then a third. And you just put in as many as you need to be comfortable in every room of the house. But that's the nice thing about heat pumps, is you can just go one step at a time, and whatever your budget is and whatever your preference is. Does that answer your question, John, about pricing?
It does. I don't know if any of our other panelists want to make any comments or questions to you.
Well,
If they do, go ahead.
Yeah. If we're talking about climate, I just wanted to build on Andy's great comments. we've done some assessments at Acadia Center at a single residential home using weather data from different points. In Bangor is one. And you can, so I can try to share this. I don't know if it'll work, but the point really from a climate perspective, the reason the Maine Climate Council plan is so dependent on electrification is a weatherized, electrified, all electric home, meaning you're using heat pumps for heating and hot water and efficient uses for other electric applications, has less than half of the greenhouse gas emissions of a natural gas heated home. It has a third of the emissions of an existing natural gas home and less than half of a tightly weatherized natural gas home. So when we talk about pipelines and getting people off of oil and all of that, really, I think the central point that I'm so glad to have this opportunity for people to talk about this here is we don't need to have a bridge to natural gas from oil to location. The technology works, it's cost effective, it's super powerful as a greenhouse gas reduction tool. It's more comfortable inside for people's homes. It's reduced air pollution, better indoor air quality, better overall public health comes out of it. So it's a super market-ready, cost-effective technology that we can really use in Maine, and and get all those benefits.
Mhm.
John, I want to just add to the other highlight, especially for the parents out there or people looking for careers. Andy's the goal is that Andy has to try to help meet here in Maine. We don't put it all on his shoulders, but it creates a really exciting opportunity that I don't want to miss. There's a great opportunity for young people who are trying to figure out what their career might be, or people looking at a second chance at a different career to really explore this option. These aggressive goals not only create change in how we're using energy, but also opportunity to be involved in something exciting. And I think we're seeing more younger people be inclined to look at careers as an electrician or in the HVAC world because they're seeing the clean energy and renewable energy market growing. And I think that's a real positive for Maine. I hope it attracts a lot of people to trades. You have a good trade school up there. And I think, we need to really take advantage of that interest. And I hope people really consider it because they're good long-term careers as they learn those skills. So I'll just put my plug in for that because we need more people in the trades. We've got a demand of about 15,000 electricians here in Maine, and you can write your own ticket, whether you're reinventing your career or whether you're starting out fresh is a good opportunity.
So Matt, I have a question about what you just said. In order to be a heat pump installer, do you need to be a licensed electrician or licensed plumber, or is there some intermediate qualification that's going to be available?
Yeah, there's a couple different programs that you can look at. The community college has a program, as well as there's a couple of independent training institutes that have certificate programs. And a lot of times you'll see that there's work both in the heat pump world, which is a little different than the electrical world. There may be a combination. So you see some electrical firms who are doing the work themselves totally or maybe partial. And then you'll see some other firms where they may specialize just in heat pumps. But you've got companies like Revision Energy, and then you've got larger firms, electrical firms who are doing the work. So there's a ton of opportunities, a lot of crossover training too. I think with kids, as they start to look for it, what should my career be? I don't think you can go wrong with pursuing an electrical license, a journey worker through an apprenticeship program right now. I think it's a home run.
John, if I could add on to Matt's great comments there, we are seeing new companies join our register for our programs. It's roughly at a rate of 1 per day. 12 years ago, we worked hard to try and find 40 installers in the state that we could tell homeowners about. I'm just checking while we're talking right now. As of today, we have 600 exactly. And on our website, we've got a couple tools to follow up on Matt's comments. If someone's interested in the trade, we offer training scholarships. We have on our website, efficiencymaine.com, a list of registered vendors who might be hiring. We have a list of registered trainers who offer training. We offer grants to those organizations so they can equip their labs with hands-on equipment so people can actually use real heat pumps and they do their training. And we're seeing a great uptake. I will tell you, I agree with Matt. If you want a job, you can, in 5 days, 6 days actually, you can go through a community college class listed on efficiencymaine.com, and you will have job offers the next week. We've got 600 registered vendors, and all the big ones are hiring. So it's pretty exciting. And we've been trying to facilitate that with the tools and Efficiency Maine.
Last year, we were looking at heat pumps, and we discovered that all the installers were short of manpower. And is that being turned around now with these programs you're talking about?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. We always worry about, is there enough demand to support the capacity, or is there enough capacity to match the demand? And with COVID-19, I was pretty sure that we would see demand for anything involving going to someone's home dry up. I mean, it was a pretty scary thing a year ago. A year ago, we had a record year, 10,000 heat pumps in 1 year. This year with COVID-19, we're seeing 20,000 heat pumps per year. So the number of companies has grown, and we're also seeing some companies having 2, 3, 4, 5 crews working all day, every day, installing the heat pumps. So we're seeing on average 80 to 100 homes putting in heat pumps every day. It's pretty exciting to see what the market has done, and the industry has responded in grand fashion. Distributors have been doing training, manufacturers have, community colleges. Maine Energy Marketers has been helping with heat pump training. So the demand has really spurred a lot of supply, and it's really exciting. And I like what Dan said, that now's the time. It's happened. There are lots of benefits, and people are happy. I tell people now that we've rebated 60,000 heat pumps, I say we now have 60,000 salespeople. We do satisfaction surveys of customers, and we go over we do about 100 a week. Last week, 90% of the people surveyed said their overall experience for putting in a heat pump, they rated it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. And there wasn't anyone below, I think, a 6 last week. So it's really catching on as people install them and find out they're pretty unusual heating system. They're the only heating system that also provides air conditioning. They're the only heating system that's over 100% efficient. It's just mind-boggling. And it takes a little while to wrap your head around that. But once you have one, people ask how do they work, and the answer is like magic. So they're really, really catching on. It's pretty exciting to see the industry respond. Everyone's pitching in. The training organizations, the suppliers, the manufacturers, distributors. It's really been great to see how Mainers rally, and lots of careers.
I'd like to go back though to what Summit was saying when it wanted to put a pipeline in. They said that they would reduce greenhouse gases by putting their gas line in. And they also described the possibility of using renewable natural clean hydrogen. Does anyone have familiarity with any of those ideas? And do you have comments about whether or not that is an equally good solution to our climate problems as electrification? Go ahead, John. Jonathan, go ahead. Just speak up.
Yeah. So I think that, to be blunt, renewable gas is greenwashing. It's not that it doesn't exist, but I've seen no studies that show that there's any way to actually capture methane from farm in any kind of economically viable way. It shouldn't necessarily be done, but is not a solution for our energy source, for our energy going forward. And a high emphasis on that in marketing natural gas or fracked gas is a way to, I think, make it so that people don't notice that about 75% of the gas which is used, is hard to get exact industry figures for any particular pipeline, but approximately 75% of all the gas that is used in the United States is from fracking, and that the release of methane from the fracking, as well as the compressing and transportation of that gas, releases a minimum of 4%. There's figures that are higher than that of the overall gas into the atmosphere, the extraordinarily high greenhouse gas potential of methane, which is the primary gas in natural gas, makes it, by some studies, worse than burning coal or oil as far as impact over the next 20 years for greenhouse effect. So I would say that there is not really it's not accurate or really viable to say, oh, there's this renewable gas and that's going to be the solution. I think it's a way of changing the conversation about really what the problems are with the natural gas infrastructure and what the impact on the environment of using it actually is.
Yeah, and John, I can add a little bit. I mean, I haven't seen what their study is and how they reach those figures, but it really depends what they're comparing. If you compare moving a home off of oil onto natural gas, you're going to get a 1/3 reduction in the total emissions from the home, because natural gas is generally, less of an emitting source than oil. However, if you move the home from oil to a heat pump, you're going to get a much more substantial reduction. You don't need to move it to gas. So homes that could be moved from oil to gas can be moved to heat pumps. They may also have been looking at the Dragon Plan. I'm not sure. There may be some applications for alternatives to electrification for large industrial usages. Sorry about my camera. And that's something that needs to be discussed. But for residential homes, apartment buildings, most business usage, we can go straight to electrification. And so if you're comparing fossil fuel against fossil fuel, natural gas has been better than oil, has been better than coal. We don't need more oil and coal now. That's not the right comparison. We have electrification through heat pumps, heat pump hot water heaters, all kinds of technologies like that. And another thing on renewable natural gas, which is a great term, and we don't even refer to Acadia Center to natural gas as natural gas. We call it fossil gas because that's what it is. It's nothing. Natural is a wonderful marketing term, and renewable natural gas is an even more wonderful marketing term. But let's break it down a bit. Hydrogen, and I have friends working on hydrogen in the United States and in Europe, smart people, but there are certain barriers to it, let's say, to produce hydrogen, that's carbon beneficial. Needs to be produced by renewable energy resources. It takes a lot more wind to produce hydrogen. Takes a lot of wind. So it's better to put the wind onto the grid, generally speaking. There are market barriers, cost barriers right now. I'm a big fan of not raising barriers to the idea of scientific investments in technology production, as long as it meets certain conditions, like it's beneficial for the environment. But it's a long way to go before renewable gas could even be thought of as a viable fuel, as an alternative to electrification. There's no reason to wait for it. We have the technology. And so I think it's a bit of a false equation. I think we have to be very careful about it. I think Jonathan makes a perfect point that it's a divergence of the conversation away from electrification to something else that can be put in pipelines. And whoever can make money off pipelines would like to keep those pipelines supplied with enough gas or whatever, to keep earning revenue on it. I don't mean to be focused on that, but I do think following where the money goes for these things is really important too, frankly. And if we're going to look at cost and benefits on a level playing field, we have to take into account all of these issues: life cycle considerations, technology viability, cost to consumers, and on all those right now, electrification by far is the best option.
So if I was a homeowner thinking about converting my old oil burner to something else, and if I got from Summit for $3,000 rebate to put in a gas line, could I use any of the infrastructure from my oil burner instead of buying a whole new set of machinery for the heat pump? In other words, is there some financial gain to converting from oil to gas rather than going from oil to electric? Andy.
Yes, there is an advantage. If you already have an oil boiler that has forced hot water or a furnace that has forced hot air, it's a lot cheaper to switch from oil to natural gas. Sometimes you can replace just it's called the burner, which is the flamethrower inside. Sometimes you can replace just that. Sometimes you replace just the boiler, but you wouldn't have to replace all the radiators throughout the house. So it might be half the price to switch from oil to natural gas compared to from oil to heat pumps. That's a good question.
Jonathan?
There are heat pumps which go air source heat pumps that also then can be used to drive a hydronic heating system. There is not as robust an industry right now as air source heat pumps to air. But my brother David in Northport just installed one and he is thrilled with it. So it's not like you cannot use a air source heat pump to actually be firing or heating the water for your existing hydronic heating system. Does not have to be natural gas. They're not they're more expensive than an air source heat pump at this point, though.
Since here's the sort of the question that got me when I first heard of this gas pipeline coming. Since the Midcoast has no existing natural gas infrastructure, what's the value of installing a pipeline now rather than going directly to heat pumps? Go ahead, Jonathan. Just speak when you're ready.
Well, from an environmental perspective, none. So, I mean, from Summit Natural Gas's perspective, it's a way to make more money. But personally, I have no interest in advancing the financial success of natural gas. My commitment is actually providing a viable future for my grandchildren and the rest of us. And I see no reason why, as a citizen, I would be encouraging more investment or more development of any fossil fuel infrastructure. As has been pointed out, I think, by everyone else on this panel, there is off-the-shelf, ready-to-go alternatives. We do not need, nor do we want, I think, if we're concerned about climate change, any more investment that locks people into using more fossil fuel. You put in a gas-fired boiler, and you are probably going to be 25 or 30 years that you're thinking, I have a good heat source, and you're going to be less inclined to decarbonize with a heat pump. So I think that for me, it's pretty clear. The answer is no good reason.
There's also a consumer perspective on that question, John, which is the cost in your home, certainly that Jonathan referred to, but if a gas utility is building out a line and getting approval for it, they're going to get a return on that investment for many, many years to come, sometimes decades. Depends on the state, depends on a lot of things. So that means that people connected to the system that are paying in are going to be helping to pay back the cost of building out that infrastructure. And I don't know how many people think 20 or 30 years from now, they're going to be wanting to connect to a natural gas system and keep paying for it. I don't know how many people will want to do that in 5 or 10 years. It's not the fuel of the future. So the idea of extending infrastructure like that, which is very expensive, but it will be paid for by the consumers who are connected to it, is not a good long-term deal. And it introduces this concept of stranded costs. Those costs for the utility become stranded when people don't want to pay for them anymore, leave the system, install electrification technologies. Well, then the remaining people connected to the system have to pay for it. And at some point, in other cases, ratepayers had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for stranded assets for electric companies and different utilities. So why would you do that now? Why would you build out that kind of expensive infrastructure when we have a heating source, electrification, that's cost competitive, cheaper, cleaner, better long-term, all those good things?
So as I read Summit's argument, they were indicating that they would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by changing from oil gas, reduce it by 38%. But I thought, well, that leaves 62% still in place and sort of frozen in place by the installation of a $90 million pipeline. And I was concerned that having the pipeline go in and having people tie into it might in fact affect the ability of the state to meet its ambitious goals. And I guess I'd like to have you guys comment on that, see if I'm missing something or if there's some other argument that I haven't thought of. Jonathan, go ahead.
I also just want to go back to that claim of reduction is based on a claim of how much greenhouse gases are released in combustion. And that is not an accurate analysis of the climate impact and the greenhouse gas impact of fracked gas. So, it is not just how much carbon dioxide is released when you burn it, it is also how much methane is released and how much energy is used in the extraction, transportation, and getting it to your door. So, I want to first of all start out by saying that number is not, that's an industry supplied number, which is misleading, though not inaccurate necessarily. It's misleading in actually how you analyze the impact of using fracked gas as a heating or for any purpose.
If I could build on that, make a broader point, which is Maine cannot achieve its greenhouse gas goals for 2030, 2040, certainly by 2050, without reducing natural gas consumption, whether it's power plant or home use. The most recent slide that I've seen that's the best is out of the Massachusetts plan. They did a very elaborate scenario for 2050. They have a 85% goal, and they modeled all kinds of scenarios, and every single one by 2040, 2050, gas consumption has to be pretty much zero. So your point, John, is extremely well taken. In fact, I think it's the heart of the whole issue here, which is we cannot continue to rely on natural gas. We have to actually reduce it, not build more infrastructure, or we're not going to meet the goals. It's similar to the transportation sector. We know that we can't meet our transportation emission goals if we continue to burn gasoline and diesel. We have to switch to electric vehicles, electric modes, and other choices. If we don't do that, we won't be reducing the emissions. Building another natural gas pipeline to a region that doesn't have an existing gas utility, I don't know what it's like. It's like expanding, building 30 more gas stations around here. It's just not where we need to go. But I think the bottom line point is that it will lock in emissions and it will defeat the state's efforts to achieve those goals. And there's really no reason for that when we have these technologies that work.
If in fact, as we originally posited, the goal of the plan is to go to total electrification for space heating and water heating by 2050 or 2045, then your argument about stranded costs, I'm wondering how that works. If you have a bunch of people who sign up for gas now and the rest of the population goes away from gas, what will happen to people who bought into the gas pipeline now?
Well, they'll pay more as long as they stay connected, and they'll pay increasing amounts as long as they stay connected if the consumer base that's paying for it starts to decline. So they'll get off it. They'll have an economic incentive to get off it as well. There could be certain rates or deals struck with large consumers, but by and large, it's a recipe for increasing costs for those people who would stay connected to it. And it's an important point that needs to be brought out from a consumer point of view, not only an environmental climate point of view, when these kinds of proposals are being made. And even where there are gas utilities that have incumbent existing infrastructure that supply homes, this just happened recently in Newport, Rhode Island. There was a problem with something going on. The gas utility blamed it on an insufficient supply, need to build a bigger pipeline and all of that. And when you went and looked into it, really it was just an issue about pressure in the system, and all of the needs of the homeowners in that area could be met by heat pumps and electrification, insulation. all those building improvements that we discuss. So even where there's an existing system, where you're not building a new distribution network and a new pipeline, that even in that case, it's important not to expand it because we have electrification, because we have climate goals. I'll stop with that, but I could keep going on it. There's also equity goals and all kinds of other goals that get implicated when we build out a fossil fuel infrastructure that we sometimes see and sometimes often don't see, actually.
I guess I'd be interested in hearing more about equity goals and issues. I don't know if, Matt, if that's something that is in your bailiwick as being on the equity committee or not.
No, not yet. We've just started that work. I can tell you that, one of the things that'll make a difference here on a natural gas pipeline is really who their anchor customers are. So as you mentioned, to the point you're saying, who would be your end users, and I think that's probably what makes a difference. I don't know the specifics of this gas pipeline. I haven't looked at the proposal, but typically that's what the case is. If you start looking at who the anchored customers might be, that gives you a good idea of what kind of lifelong use that might have for a pipeline. So, and I don't know the specifics in this case.
Jonathan.
I can address a little bit of the equity. Part of the problem with the gas pipelines are that often the compressor stations around the country are disproportionately located in poor communities, and so the environmental impact and air quality for those communities is disproportionately carried by those who have less. Also, the fracking and the damage to the aquifers and the increased toxic gases that are released. Not, methane isn't specifically toxic to humans unless you have a lot of it, but there's lots of other radiation and benzene and all kinds of other things that are released in the process of fracking and in pumping. That also is disproportionately hitting rural and less advantaged communities. So it is not a industry which has a good equity profile as far as who bears the biggest environmental impact on our societal's cost there.
I guess I don't understand the impact of compressing stations. How are those impactful on communities?
They leak.
No matter what, I mean,
Even
they
have leaks. It's not like it's a technology that never has any issues, and so.
We have a number of questions people have raised about fracking. I'm curious about what your point is about fracking, Jonathan, or anybody else wants to step in.
Sure, I can lead off, and other folks who I'm sure know about it too. So the process of fracking, I'm sure most of everybody knows, involves injecting a secret elixir. We can thank our former vice president back during when he was advocating for the interests of, I can't remember the corporation right now that he was part of, but it passed a law that made it, whatever the fracking solution is, secret. But it is known to have a lot of toxic chemicals in it, as well as some specific types of sand. And they pump it into, and they under high pressure, and they crack the rock. In doing so, that also often will poison the aquifers in that area, probably permanently. I don't think there's anybody who knows if it's possible to recover an aquifer after it's been filled with toxic liquid. And so, as well as there's large releases of methane, because the primary gas component of fracked gas is methane. And so there used to be that the industry claimed very low levels of leakage of methane, and that gave them part of their argument about why it was so clean. My understanding is that they were able to choose which wellheads were monitored or were tested. So the industry actually told the government, this is the wellhead we want you to test. So it gave a very skewed analysis, with now the ability to test for methane by satellite and looking at overall levels and then tracing back where it's coming from. It is shown that the amount of leakage from the fracking process and the compression process is vastly higher than industry has indicated in the past. So that so it creates both a damage to the aquifers and as well as increased air pollution locally with the released other toxic gases with the methane, as well as big plumes of methane. There's been this confusion with climate scientists, this is my understanding, about why is methane levels rising so quickly. And it looks like the primary reason why methane levels are rising so much more quickly than predicted is because if you use industry standards of leaking, it doesn't match out. If you look at the observed amounts from satellites, now the equation works. So so that's that's some of the reasons why fracking is not a good thing.
Thank you. I think you've covered the territory. Any other comments about that?
I don't have anything to add on fracking, but I want to go back to the point about leakage, because leakage is occurring in it's occurring in every natural gas distribution system, under the streets of Boston, wherever it is. And the leaks are emitting a substantial amount of methane into the air. They are another source of greenhouse gas pollution. One state recently tried to figure out what the implications were for the leakage from existing gas distribution networks, pipelines, and found that they could not meet their state targets unless the leakage was attended to. It's a prolific problem throughout, wherever there's gas distribution networks, extremely expensive to fix, but it is a known thing that will happen. The pipes will leak. So do we want that in mid-coast Maine? I don't think so. Not only from an emission point of view, but there's also obvious instances of public safety being threatened. There was an explosion in Lawrence, Mass. Unfortunately, somebody died. People were out of their homes for 3 months. That was because the utility didn't manage the distribution system properly. And while I hate to point to one example and say, it's a gloom and doom, there's one thing that happened there, the fact of the matter is, these happen frequently. They've happened in New York City, they happened in New Jersey, they happened in other places. And indoor air quality from natural gas, people might be familiar with recent studies about what happens from natural gas cooking and the damage it does to indoor air quality in your home, even if you have a ventilation system. So you start to go down this road, you have kids at home, you've got, this is just not something we want to invest in. And again, to make the point, we don't need to invest in this when we have these alternatives. So public health, we're talking about climate, we're talking about Maine meeting its climate goals, incredibly important for all aspects of the future of the state. But immediately there are these other considerations that need to be taken into account. Indoor air quality, public health, safety, and in other cases when it addresses fracking, water quality, other kinds of traditional pollution. There's really, those arguments all have to be on the table when there's a proposal like Summit's out there.
I can just tag on one more one is affordability. Projections on the cost of using natural gas going forward is an increasing cost. It is not something that is actually more affordable. That is also a myth. That projected cost of generating electricity by 2023 is higher than solar or really almost any or wind. And as stranded costs get more increasingly burdening the ratepayer, the consumer, then for any homeowner, the increasing cost of natural gas is predicted to make it less and less affordable. So if you want to have greater control over your energy costs, if you decarbonize with heat pumps, and you also, there is some excellent rebates obviously already. There's some more that are likely to be coming through with some great legislation on the federal level that is expected to pass and on state level. Those things are what will actually make it much more affordable for you to heat your home, cool your home, provide transportation in the future as well. So I think it's just, there isn't even an economic incentive if you look more than just a year or two out for hooking onto natural gas.
So, so it's my understanding that natural gas powers a huge amount of our electrical generation plant in Maine. So aren't you just suggesting that people go to electrification and put in heat pumps, but we're still burning natural gas to get that electricity? How do you solve that problem?
Well, we solve it. First of all, it's still better right now, even with that fuel mix profile on the electric system. But we have opportunities to decrease natural gas electricity generation through offshore wind and through all other kinds of renewables, distributed solar. They're all available. They're being promoted, different incentive programs or different permitting processes. But this goes back to the point again, the natural gas that's on the system right now, on the grid that's coming in, either it's based in Maine or it's supplied into the ISO New England grid, which is where we get our electricity, no matter where the plant is based. That has to decline. We have to reduce the amount of natural gas electricity generation, and we can because we have alternatives with offshore wind, with distributed solar, with storage, with better energy efficiency. All kinds of tools are available to reduce that down and continue to lower. And the cleaner the grid gets, the more carbon free the grid gets, the more your heat pump is going down to zero in terms of emissions.
So
I would add, I'm glad Dan mentioned, because it's beyond over my head, the source of electricity. But one of the reasons that Efficiency Maine is so excited about heat pumps is that they are wildly efficient. So heat pumps that we're rebating today can average over the course of the winter 300 or 400% efficient. So regardless of where the energy comes from, you get 3 or 4 times more heat. So it's a combination of efficiency, which is what we're focused on, and as Dan mentioned, the grid itself, or you can power heat pumps with 100% renewable electricity. So it's a pretty nice 1-2 punch to try and reduce your carbon footprint. Get your energy renewably, and then use it extremely efficiently, and that's what heat pumps can do for people.
So I've read Richard Silkman's 2019 study on transition to a non-carbon economy. And he talks about us building a huge number of onshore and offshore wind turbines, as well as vast solar arrays. Can we afford that in Maine?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you mean by afford. I think I understand where you're headed with that. I can tell you that, as far as natural gas goes, it's a mix as far as a generation and balancing our load needs. And look at the retiring generation, everything from coal plants and oil-fired plants that are still in operation. It's it's an important part of the mix. But as far as moving over to renewables, I mean, energy is tough, especially generation. I've been in my fair share of meetings where communities rejected solar or wind or other types of generation, and that's something that communities are going to have to continue to look at. And I think it's important to have those kind of discussions because some communities embrace some projects and they don't embrace others. But the reality is, we do have a good deal of retiring generation within ISO New England, and we are shifting over more to renewables. I can tell you that the wind turbines and the generation we have here in Maine, we're already repowering a good deal of those with more efficient units, which is pretty exciting. As far as moving forward, I think Maine has an opportunity, and most importantly is that the more of the generation we can control as a state, I think we're in a better position. I think that's really important for our future economy. So, I think this is all going to be it's hard to change your community, and it's hard to start looking at what you may have to do to keep your lights on. As we start to change over to more electrical services, whether it be for your TV or whether it be to heat your house or cool your house, we have to have pretty frank discussions about what we're willing to accept as far as changes to the landscape to make sure that happens. And I think it's a two-pronged approach. It's part about bringing in new technology to help reduce the actual usage at each person's home, or whether it be your car or vehicle, but that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is working on the generation component, and figuring out what kind of mix we find acceptable as a society. And I think that discussion, what's happening here today, I think those are all really healthy conversations.
I remember from Richard Silkman's report that he recommends that for the next 30 years, we have to spend $2 billion a year putting in new generation. But he also points out that every year we send more than that out of state to buy fossil fuels. Do we have the capacity in Maine to build the kind of renewable infrastructure or renewable generation capacity that Mr. Silkman's talking about?
I believe that on average, Maine lately has been somewhere between $5 and $6 billion of imported fossil fuels a year. So that's a pretty large budget that if we start digging into our own generation with renewables here, that keeps more money circulating in the local economy. Anytime you're buying something and bringing it to the state, you're just draining money out of the state. So, and the capacity offshore at times, I've heard up to 19 times New England's total electrical use could be generated in the Gulf of Maine. So like I don't think we are thinking that just offshore wind is the only solution, but it probably will need to be a major component. Suitably citing that, conversations with the fishing community, it's an ongoing both political as well as an economic, process, but I think that will end up needing to be a major source of electricity. Making it, there's a bill right now that is going to be in the legislature about making it possible for ratepayers, like a consumer, not just a consumer utility, but consumer generation. So the ratepayers of Maine would benefit from that investment instead of it being just, investors from anywhere around the world or anywhere in the making the profit off of that generation. That's another way to kind of like also lower costs. So I think if you read the analysis on why a consumer-owned utility and why consumer, basically where you're removing the investors' guaranteed profit margins and making it so that the ratepayers benefit directly and also have control over the decision-making process, that savings makes it so we can afford to actually decarbonize fully and not increase the energy costs of any of the consumers of Maine. So, if you start making electricity too expensive, people aren't going to want to decarbonize because it costs too much. So you have to control costs, and there's a bunch of ways in which we can do that. So I think the short answer, John, is yeah, we can afford to do it if we do it correctly. But it will take going after some sacred cows like investor-owned utilities, for instance.
I think you've got a bigger problem than that. I agree, John, with a lot of things you said, but I'm concerned about that for a couple of reasons. So one, that right now, do we have the capacity to do this? We have to have significant investments in our transmission delivery systems. And I think that's, we're seeing that already with interconnections. There's a lot of proposed projects. There's a couple $1 billion worth of proposed projects we've seen that are sort of on the shelf. But we really don't have a way to get that energy to and from. That's a major challenge, I think. And I've advocated for the fact that we need to really take a hard look at that. I'm concerned a little bit about a transition to a consumer-owned utility. I'll tell you why. It's in the other states that we've seen that happen with our other members across the country. We've seen some of those projects frozen because of that, because it becomes litigious, and it's a 10-year gap between what our goal should be and then what actually happens. And so I have some concerns about that effort. I understand the frustration people have. I get that. I'm also really concerned about the amount of investments that need to happen on the T&D side to make that viable. And I think that's one of the things we're looking at. You see with the solar projects in the queue right now, there's a lot of question about whether or not we can get that energy to market. So I'll leave it with that. I know this is one topic where people are going to go in different directions here, and that's fine.
I want to build on those comments. A few years ago, Central Maine Power got approval to build the Maine Power Reliability Project, a transmission line. They got approval from the Maine PUC. It was $1.6 billion for one line. And when we hear costs, you know, I'm struck throughout my career how often we hear costs associated with renewables or energy efficiency. And for some reason, we don't hear costs associated with more traditional energy infrastructure. So for example, at a time when my organization was advocating for efficiency Maine and efficiency surcharges, as opponents often call them, there's a, what's the cost of energy efficiency? How can we afford energy efficiency? It's a tax. But the truth of it is, the large infrastructure projects like the $1.6 billion line, the transmission costs that we pay to the transmission system was a far greater amount of money and a far greater rate of escalation and cost to consumers than energy efficiency or the renewable portfolio standard or other clean energy policies. So $1.6 billion for one transmission line that might not be needed, might not have been needed, had we had in the state an appropriate assessment to look at alternatives. What would those alternatives have been? Well, actually, Rich Silkman was part of a group that proposed an alternative, and it was going to cost half as much as the line, and was rejected. And without going down this rabbit hole too far, one of the reasons is the way our energy system is regulated and where it puts incentives. So Rich Silkman's proposal, which was a combined solar and other mix of energy systems at $800 million, would have been paid for entirely by Maine ratepayers. The line, the Maine power reliability line, 1.6 billion, twice as much, would have been paid for by all ratepayers in New England. So if you're the Maine PUC and you're looking at that cost differential, you're going to go with the larger cost because Maine's only going to pay 8% of it instead of 100% of the 800 million. This makes no sense. So behind a lot of the decisions that have occurred about how our energy system looks and what it costs and who's paying for it are a set of incentives and rules that were designed decades and decades ago to build a reliable energy system, electricity system, and have no relevance to a world where we have heat pumps and rooftop solar and all kinds of technologies that are distributed in our communities. I hope I'm not being overly wonky here, but I think this is a really critical point for people to understand. And part of energy system planning is where those incentives lead decision makers, whether they run utilities or run the grid, to decide what's important and what gets funded. And then, the other part of your question really goes to siting. And I think I just want to really endorse the comments that Matt has made and Jonathan made. The siting raises all kinds of concerns in communities about what their community is going to look like. Solar farms, offshore wind transmission lines, lobstermen are upset around Mohegan. Those kinds of community-based concerns not treated in a proper way so that there's a feeling that voices are being heard and good decision-making is occurring. If the net result is we stop projects from solar to wind to whatever, we're going to just continue to have gas, continue to have the energy system we have. We're going to continue to have a grid that isn't invested in, a grid that needs to be invested in to meet the needs of all the consumers in the state. I just think these pieces all have to come together, and we really have to have transparency here. We have to have inclusive processes, but we can't stop by saying we don't want that project, we don't want that project. The cumulative total of that could be that we don't meet our greenhouse gas goals, among other impacts.
Yeah, it's a major expansion possibility too. There's if you look at the corridor from basically Pittsfield to Aroostook County, I mean, we've got potential for generation there, but we're locked up. We can't get the energy out of there. And you look at northern Aroostook County, they're locked into the Canadian market. So, Maine really has to take a step back. And to your point, if we're going to embrace our own generation, we have to really take a look at T&D as a component there. And I think that's one of the steps that this all kind of happened very quickly, as much as it may not seem like it to everybody. I mean, the evolution here in technology and the availability for investors to land on our shore has happened fast. And part of that's messaging. I think we should embrace that and really take a look at how we can get some of those projects done. But you're right, it's so much community engagement has to happen between now and the execution of those projects.
One of the local businessmen I consulted was all for green power. but was concerned that the substations around Belfast are filling up so fast that there's going to be no distribution available. How do we address that? Is that a PUC issue? Is that a structural issue? Is that a microgrid issue? How do we approach that?
Well, we have a system where the utility is a planner for the future and an investor and recoups a return on those investments. One of the, I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we're putting out a paper soon, but one of the ideas would be to separate those functions so that the substations, the infrastructure are planned for and invested in without being tied to how much money will be made off of those investments. In other words, what's the public interest in building a grid of the future in the state of Maine, and how should it be done? It doesn't mean the utilities shouldn't participate, they should, all kinds of reasons for that. But we're seeing oftentimes, you know, a grid in this state, and it's true of most states, but you know, Maine has very old infrastructure. It just hasn't been invested in over time. And when we talk about accelerating and the energy revolution that we're living in right now, I mean, those are just terrific ways to capture where we are right now. Those comments, we've got to catch up with ourselves, you know.
Jonathan?
I think that also the, as it was pointed out by Dan earlier, the way in which the Public Utilities Commission, well, it actually goes beyond that. The way profits are guaranteed for utility really incentivizes large transmission lines rather than maintenance and reliability. They don't get, I believe, as high a rate of return on some forms of, you know, increasing efficiency does not make them the same rate of return as investing in a large interstate transmission line. Like, so if, you know, they have a responsibility to basically maximize profits for their shareholders. And with that in mind, they're going to go after those most guaranteed profitable parts of their business. And the highest rate of return, I believe, is I think 13% guaranteed rate of return on these large scale interstate transmission lines. So hence the large commitment to the corridor, which is projected to, if it's built, create, I think, a $70 million profit per year. That's a lot of money. That's even to a huge multinational like Avangrid. So, so I think that our regulations, unfortunately, incentivize sometimes not the behavior we want out of the corporations, out of the utilities, which we're depending on maintaining and in creating the reliant and robust grid we need on a local level. Much less increasing efficiency. So which is better.
So we've had a number of questions sent in. I hope everyone got the message from Brenda early on that we want to collect your comments and opinions on this issue by email, but the questions are also coming in, and we've answered some of them. One question was about how can we get cleaner electricity, and we've talked about wind and solar construction. There are opportunities for backyard wind. Is there a potential for small scale wind turbines that are useful, or is that not scalable?
I'm probably not the right person to answer this, but you know, I tend to think that you know, that could be challenging in some locations, just based on some of the work we've been through. You know, there are applications, and certainly there's a long history of having own personal wind to serve certain needs, and that might work if you have some acreage, but just knowing some of the challenges with wind in general and site location, that could be tough, but there might be locations where that works well.
You don't think all the neighbors would like a 300-foot tower?
I know they won't.
So I guess one last question I have, and maybe this is for Andy, maybe it's for the rest of you. If heat pumps are so useful, what's wrong? Why aren't we just putting them in at a full speed? What's the inertia? Is there a problem with supply of heat pumps? Is there a problem with the supply of rebates? Or is it just a public relations and information problem.
I'd like to say objection, Your Honor, leading the witness. That I wouldn't call 20,000 a year a problem. It's we've seen transition from burning wood to coal took hundreds of years, from coal to oil took, I'm guessing, 100 years. I don't actually know that number. And the transition from burning oil to heat pumps is happening in years. So again, 20,000 this year. Our goal is 100,000 over 5 years, and we're right on track for that, despite a pandemic. There isn't. So it's John. I'm glad you asked the question. It was a leading question. I appreciate it.
I'm concerned a little bit because our conversation here has been very interesting in terms of the financial stuff, but I'm looking at a climate crisis, which is moving forward. And I can't believe that we're going to let, I don't know, I guess I'd like to think that people see it as an emergency and not just as a problem. Should we stay with oil? Should we go to gas? How much do we want to spend? How much do we want to send out of state? Does anyone else feel that there's an emergency here?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. There's an emergency. We have, under the IPCC, the international scientific community, we're in a 10-year window here. We really are out of time and debating the issue and debating what to do, what we need to do. We have technologies that work. We've got to get it out there. And I think we all need to be addressing the climate issue under that sense of urgency. We have a decade to work with it. The issue in part on heat pumps, and it varies widely. I think one thing I want to just note, though, is Maine really deserves a lot of credit. Maine and Vermont are the two states in the Northeast with the fastest penetration of heat pumps. Now, that's for a whole bunch of reasons. It's because of Efficiency Maine and the great programs that Andy works on. It's because Efficiency Vermont, and Vermont also has been promoting shifting off oil to electrification. It's also because those states are two states that don't have significant gas utility coverage, where there's an incumbent competitor trying to sell their product. So one thing I think we ought to recognize is the public education around heat pumps in Maine is actually higher than most places. The market penetration is happening faster. You can go to many states in our region where they don't know what a heat pump is. They don't think it works. We happen to be invited into a coalition in New Jersey, perfect state for heat pumps. It's a little warmer than Maine. They don't think they're going to work. They think the state's too cold. There's no vendors to sell the product. Vendor education is a really key part, and Efficiency Maine has had vendor education programs. So the programs work. The fact that Maine, the alternatives in Maine are oil, propane, wood, and not a gas utility also helps a lot. But states are starting to set goals where there's going to be massive changes in the market over the next 10 years in New York and Massachusetts. Maine has a very ambitious goal. And that is a signal of some of the urgency that's being felt.
If I can chime in too, I think that I totally agree that our timeline is very short, and in order to ramp up even to a higher rate the transition over to decarbonizing our heating and transportation system, which is the largest section of our greenhouse gas emissions, that heat pumps play a key role in. This legislation I was referring to, the Green Bank or the Green Accelerator, specifically if it passes, will target 40% of its allocation through Efficiency Maine. 40% of that money would be going to economically disadvantaged parts of the Maine communities. So like if someone's thinking I cannot afford, even with the current rebate, a heat pump, even though in the long run it's going to save me money, this is going to make it more cost competitive. And if we as a society decide to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel production and distribution, then a more fair comparison. Like right now, I mean, even when I say, oh, you're subsidizing heat pumps, yeah, but right now we're subsidizing the fossil fuel industry on a massive scale on a federal level. So I think that as we start trying to have a more and we just need to make sure that people transition off. We have 10 years. We have to transition off of fossil fuel. There isn't really any other choice for a viable future. So got to put the money there.
Andy?
John, I just want to follow up. I'm glad you asked it. Does everyone realize how serious this is? I know for me personally, that sometimes it's going to be a bit daunting as to what I can do to save the whole planet. It's a bit paralyzing sometimes. And efficiencymaine.com has got a whole bunch of steps. You can take it one step at a time. We've got a list of where the cheapest LED light bulbs are in the state, so you can buy 4 light bulbs for $1.97. Won't stop climate change all by itself, but it's a little baby step to take. We've got rebates on heat pump water heaters. Dan, you mentioned that. Thank you for that. Heat pump water heater can save you about $200 a year. People ask, how long does it take to pay back? And the answer is it doesn't cost more in the beginning. You actually start out ahead. And we're seeing 10,000 Mainers switch to heat pump water heaters every year. We're about 60-fold higher market share than the rest of the country. So Mainers are figuring this out. And I agree with Dan's comments that we're lucky to live in a place that's old housing, cold climate, expensive oil as a heating fuel. And Mainers don't like to waste money. So we have a easier lift than some of our colleagues around the country. But efficiencymaine.com will give you information on these technologies, it'll offer you rebates on these technologies, offering financing for the part that we don't subsidize with a rebate. We've got a list, as I told you, for heat pumps, 600 independent installers. So it can be a little daunting to think, how do you get your carbon footprint down to zero? And you don't have to. You could take a step right now. And I want to match what Dan said. Mainers are doing a fabulous job. I just told you we've got 30 to 60-fold the market share of the rest of the country for heat pump water heaters. We're #2 state in the country to switch to heat pump water heaters. Mainers will buy 1.5 million LEDs this year, not cumulative over the last 10 years. This year alone, 1.5 million LED light bulbs. And Efficiency Maine, one of the ways we get our funding is we get paid by the grid for freeing up electric capacity that would otherwise require a power plant be built. And we're paid right now to run, we talk about, instead of megawatts, we talk about negative or negawatts. And we're paid right now for the equivalent of a 200 megawatt, or we say negawatt power plant that didn't get built. There's land, there's no fuel, there's no emission, there's no risks. It's just light bulbs and heat pumps and other efficient equipment that Mainers have invested in. So I think it is a big crisis. I do agree with you, John. I'm not trying to belittle it at all. I promise you that. On the other hand, I think there's reason for hope. And I think we should all be pretty proud in Maine of how we are scrambling and leading the nation in many ways in adopting energy efficiency. And one last plug, I hope people will go to efficiencymaine.com and take some action. It feels good, guys. It's a little less, I feel a little paralyzed when I think about where the world's going. And then I say, wait, maybe I could change 4 more light bulbs. Maybe I could buy 1 more heat pump and it more than pay for itself. So there are good things happening in Maine. And I hope we don't lose track of that. Not all is lost. We're in a pretty bad shape, I will say that, but not all is lost.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do every day.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're very welcome. It's a thrill for me to get to.
We're getting to an hour and a half, and I'm ready to close the program down. I noticed that a lot of people have contributed to the chat and with ideas about new systems and ideas about where to get information. Please send us your comments for our report about what you think about gas pipeline versus electrification, about the amount of effort it's going to take to electrify Maine, to decarbonize the whole world. I guess one of the things I'm concerned about is I think it's going to be painful. There are going to be hard choices to be made. And it won't just be a question of choosing between this heating system and that heating system. There are going to be costly decisions to be made. And I hope people can get the idea. The 10 years you're talking about is a brief window, and the consequences of not meeting the Paris and other goals could be disastrous. And so I really appreciate you're all participating tonight. If there's anything further any of you want to throw in, besides Andy, he's already had all his airtime.
If I could throw in also just plug for Sierra Club, as far as if you're looking for resources about fracking and gas distribution, as well as other energy policy. I don't have the website in front of me right now, but I'm sure you can Google it quickly. There's a fair bit of resources there just to do more research. And also a lot of information about pending bills mostly on the state level, that if you choose to, as a citizen, to become active with the legislature, you can be writing testimony for hearings and helping shape policy so that the society we want for the future is the one we're creating now. And that is one tool you can use to be better informed about what is out there. I know that Acadia Center has done a lot of great work on a lot of good stuff as well. And you know, just inform yourself about what's there, and we all can make a huge difference. Nobody, you know, our power as citizens is much greater than sometimes we have been led to believe, and we can have an enormous influence on what energy future Maine has. And the legislative session is in hot action right now, so now's the time to go for it. So.
Well, I might as well add then, John, if it, we have acadiacenter.org has clean heating pathway material and heat pump, how do heat pumps work, and fossil fuel phase out page. And so there's a lot of stuff in there too.
Great. And Matt, I wanted to thank you for all you were doing on the Climate Council and on the working groups. Keep it up. Thank you for taking time from all of your busy nights to come. So if there's nothing further, I will thank everyone for participating and thank all our viewers. And I will ask you to send your comments and thoughts to belfast.cit.sci@gmail, which of course stands for Belfast Citizen Science. We look forward to your comments. We'll be making a report to the City Council with our thoughts and recommendations. And have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thanks, John.